Well, welcome everybody. It's super good to have you here. We're in this we wanted to try both the presentation in here and then our conversation in here so that we didn't have to shift spaces. So we're going to see how that works. I think it'll work better, and it's a little bit more intimate as well. And obviously the biggest challenge is the tech, trying to make sure that the people online are able to kind of be part of this community as well. So that's been the tricky part. So if you see Bruce freaking out over there, that's what's going on. He's just trying his best to do this. I wanted to start today with, well, two things. One, while we're present, I opened up the doors so you can at least get a sense of the wild that moves through this space and holds all of us. So, while you're being held in the reflections of Karen today and some of her thoughts, kind of let the wild that you're hearing, maybe bird song or water flow or just the breeze, see if it can affect you in a way that's not just noticing in your head, but feeling it in your sensations. So where it sinks down maybe even into a visceral, like gut level. Because that's where I find Karen's wisdom is leading us, is how do we tether soul to the kind of presence of nature that is us, right? We're in that experience all the time. And so I think it's a beautiful way to reflect today. So I'll guide you through some of her thoughts today, obviously, and hopefully you find some of them sticking to who you are. But I also wanted to take a moment and just pause in that. I was in a conversation with a woman the other day who is of another faith tradition, and she was commenting to me that if she wasn't in that faith tradition, she would come to this community. But she's in a faith tradition, right? And it struck me, the beauty of this experience reflects in many ways when I was growing up in Lutheran theology has this kind of idea embedded in it called the priesthood of all believers. And their notion was somewhat siloed in that they thought that all of the people within this Lutheran body were like the priests, right? It made everybody present, elevated everybody present. So everybody had capacity to be able to both understand and articulate how divine works. So everybody was invited into the priesthood. And I think in our day, I would just say everybody who is seeking a sense of soul in their life, it is the priesthood of all believers, right? Of all the people who are seeking their path. And that this format is a way of saying, yes, institutionalized religions are helpful and have been helpful in the past. There's a lot of handles you can hang on to. But this feels to me like where we're headed, right? We're lifting up the priesthood. And then what I think we're going to discover today is that capacity to say, when we talk about all voices, it's that voice too, right? We can't not hear that voice. And that's an invitation to us to think about our souls not as a private journey that we articulate in our heads, but as a pure collaboration with the very fabric of life that's sustaining us and has been sustaining us, right? So let's break open that notion. If you're in the Lutheran tradition, you're kind of familiar with that term, but just kind of hold that idea that let's imagine a priesthood of all, period, and see where that leads us. Huh? Yeah, thank you. Is priest implied gender? Smacks of gender. Priest, yes. So we got to come up with another word.
It's just we don't put the ESS on the end of. I mean, they're all actors now, not actors and actresses, so they could all be priests.
Priests. The priests.
Yeah, we're doing away with the.
Yeah, I got to work on that one.
Version, so it's more
Priest held divine, masculine, and feminine.
Yes, right. I get it. But I do get that. I had a woman once who I worked with who she took the word God And I love what she did with it because she wanted God Goddess. And so she pulled off the capital G and she added a small d. And so God is G-O-D-D. And so it held for her God and Goddess all at the same time. But no one's using it. But it was brilliant. So we were thinking like that. So I was all excited to talk to Karen, partly because Karen, we were close to Earth Day, and there's a lot of Earth Day energy floating around. So I was super excited that Karen would be all geared up for Earth Day. Come to find out, Earth Day is one of her least favorite days of the year. And I was like, uh-oh, I don't know where this conversation is going to go, because it has been one of my favorite days of the year, right? It's a day for me to focus in on my relationship with the Earth. But for her, she points out, and I think rightly so, right, that humans have kind of objectified their relationship with the planet and the biosphere to the point where we then pick a day where we celebrate that relationship. And we do that all the time with our relationship with nature, right? We think, I'm going to go out and take a walk in nature, as if we get to go into nature for a bit and then go back where? I mean, where are we going, right? This whole idea that we've sort of bifurcated this notion that we actually exist. We are nature. And that we have somehow driven a wedge between our conceptual framework of where nature is and we are is pure illusion. And she's going to unpack that illusion, I think, a little bit in her language. So that idea, and you hear it all the time, right? Even the beautiful ideas of forest bathing, right? To go out into the forest and be there and just be bathed by the forest. We're still seeing it as this outside experience, when in reality it's there must be a way to kind of decenter the human at the center of this whole thing, and then all of this secondary material on the outside that we get to engage with, when in fact we're just a part of that whole picture. And to construct soul like that is just a helpful way to, I think, build a degree of awareness about how you're present for soul, but soul is not just your siloed experience. In many ways, it reminds me of that first leave-taking in the Hebrew Scriptures where we depart from the Garden of Eden, right? We think that we left the Garden of Eden and we're going it on our own, and we see that as a departure, but in reality, our soul and our body can't leave the garden, right? You can't get out of the garden. So this whole notion that we've somehow left that and then constructed civilizations and empires and engineering and constructs that then create who we are is flawed, right? Because at the core, we live inside of this garden. We're in it. We're woven into it. And inside of that matrix this is the way I think Karen would describe it. Inside of that matrix, we know at a different kind of level. So as we grow or live into the awareness that we are inside that matrix, like a preborn child's umbilical cord, right, connected to mother, we are fully integrated into that mother with every heartbeat, every breath. This is our nurturing place. And you can almost think about it like the neural pathways of the delta system that are connected to the sea, right? It too knows its deep connection to the tides. It can't not be without that neural pathway. Or the mycelial web that they talked about last night at the filming of the mushrooms, right? The mycelial web interconnects everything beneath the soil, and all we see of it is these mushroom heads popping up hidden in the ground. All of this is an indicator that there is just no separating, no teasing out our experience from the experience of nature. So what has happened that has driven that wedge? And for Karen, she's pretty clear that the kind of the initial wedge of the departure from the garden, that is pure illusion, is we've domesticated ourselves, right? We've slowly built up the cushion of domestication. And that from agriculture to the Industrial Revolution to the information age, we continue to construct this civilization that holds us, and then we think we belong to civilization. And then we orient to civilization, and that continues to drive this kind of widen, maybe that's a good way of framing it, it widens the gap of our relationship with the natural world. So that rather than, the long walk journey on planet Earth here today, I was able to get on my scooter and, with petroleum products and a lot of mechanical engineering and some nice leather, and a helmet, right? I was able to get here lickety split, right? We have insulated ourselves from our connection, yet the umbilical cord cannot be severed. So that's what she feels is the problem. And so for her, she has traveled down this road that she calls finding feral. And feral is this taking something that's been domesticated and returning it back to the wild, right? That's the process of feral. And in some ways, Karen and her partner and many people like her are like guides to feral again. How do you find your way back into the most dynamic relationship of all? And what are ways in which you can do that then begin to build your soul's capacity for this resonance inside of that which already is, right? It's all and all that you're held in. I remember it's like the Beatles song, right? Get back to where you once belonged. Get back, JoJo. Find feral. How do you do that? In many ways, I think for Karen, and I'm going to go through some of the ways in which she's done that we can think about today, but it almost feels to me like it has a sort of biblical or religious component to it, in that some of the narratives in our biblical literature are all about finding feral in a sense, right? The Exodus itself was a people stuck in a construct that they felt was dehumanizing or sucking the life out of them. And leave-taking, right? Leave-taking Egypt to move into wild was their method of trying to re-find themselves. And of course, in the wilds of the wilderness that they journeyed, they reframed an idea of God that then they went and built a civilization around. So we're constantly doing that. But you can kind of feel this, like that there are times when leave-taking is an option. And for Karen, clearly, and those in her circle, that is one of the requirements of refinding your own wild soul again, is to find a way to kind of take leave of all of the domestic things that kind of continue to drive that wedge between you and the natural world. So what does that look like? So I've got about four things that I think she kind of, stumbled into as she's taken this journey. And the one is one we've heard over and over again. We've heard it from a lot of you as well. And that is to discover a different language. A language that's not in your head, but a language of the gut, right? Of the senses, which probably is best not tethered to words. So while, and in my conversations with a lot of you, you would say, I can't find the words to describe it. Well, I actually think that's a good thing. And maybe it's worth not finding words. And that's why maybe it's worth writing poetry, even though that's words. But it's like jumble words, or rhythm, or dance, or breathing, or something other than language, because language is the way in which we've described this whole process of domestication that we have in our heads. And we all know that the longest journey is the journey from your head to your heart, right? Where the gut has this more capacity to experience the whatever you're experiencing without the language. So finding kind of a gut language, for lack of a better way to frame it, is one of the ways in which she tries to say that's one thing you have to do. You have to almost become bilingual so that you can both operate in your head, because you're going to have to, but that you have this capacity to be present intuitively through sensation, through the being in touch with how the breeze is affecting you. You know, that rhythm, that's a completely different rhythm. And thinking about making sure that your soul is not just driven by the chatter in your head, which for many of us, including me, has been the majority of my soul development. And soul should also have this other language set that it's connected to. So I think that's just a beautiful way of thinking about it. I was reminded a little bit back in the day, Matthew Fox. Any of you know Matthew Fox? He's a rebel Catholic priest. Pretty much got kicked out of the Catholic Church for the most part. But he tried to take the liturgy and strip language out of it and create an experiential moment he called the technocosmic mass. So, and I've been to a couple of technocosmic masses, and they start off with rhythmic dancing, nobody talking, just movement, and trying to get in touch with your body for the day, and then dancers coming around with fire, and there's water being moved around, and it's trying to get down into the chakras that connect you to that experience, right? And then there is a grieving time of all that you know has been broken, and people just moan for like 15 minutes of moaning. And I was there with teenagers, and I tell you, that didn't go over very well. But people just kind of just getting it out, right? There was no words, it was just crying and groaning, and then kind of finding their way back out of that. And the whole experience ends with this just dance party at the end, with just very kind of techno-rhythmic music, right? That just is almost like a modern version of indigenous drumming. And that's where it ends. And you're just sweating and exhausted, and you've had this different experience. That's the kind of language I think Karen might say would be an alternative language set that we're trying to get in touch with. For her, she finds it oftentimes in more quiet ways, like just going down to the pond and sitting with the frogs for 30 minutes and listening to the frogs and feeling maybe like frogs feel, or like the Dalai Lama says, feeling same, where you're so present for another wild creature that you're feeling frog yourself, right? So staring or being with frog, she begins to see herself more clearly. And that's just, to me, a powerful way in which to begin to learn how to speak that language that begins to shape the soul of her, right? And she says, you know, frogs, they lie in the shallows not because they went to frog school, right? They live as frogs in the shallows, and to unite with them for a moment in their frogness is, if you will, kind of the spiritual experience, right? It is the experience of what it means to be alive. So how do you find yourself in the eyes of frog is just a beautiful way. And now she lives in a place where she can visit that pond on a daily basis, right? That can become a ritual behavior. But that's that existential moment of same that allows her this departure out from the bifurcation that is imposed on us because of all of our creature comforts, right, that we've created that support us. So that's one thing, is learn a different language. And I think it's not a language I know very well. I don't know about you all, but I'm sort of new to that language. And she said, don't be hard on yourself, right? Just give yourself time to learn the language. It takes time, like any language. But learn that language. excuse me, the next one she does, and she does this intentionally, and I know a lot of people do this, is just keep choosing less. Don't think about your life solutions as adding something to solve your problems. Go the other direction. You know, the old less is more direction. Less is the pathway to finding your way back to, if you will, garden space, right? Just don't add one more thing. Learn, how do I let go of certain things? And they clearly have taken that approach, both with stuff that we use to insulate ourselves, but also kind of like social norms, right? The norms of how I look, or how I speak, or how I, what I'm doing with my time. Less is more, even in that, right? And we tend to try to keep up with whoever the Joneses are. We're keeping up with them for sure. How do you say, no, I don't need to do that? And it's a pathway. It's just a practice that you can engage that helps you move back towards this more sustainable, I would say, space as well. The next one that she says, and we've heard this again over and over again, so I think no matter what path you stumble into this one every time, and that is, and you know this one so well, slow it down, right? Slow everything down. And I was laughing because this morning, Lori came in, Bruce was here. My heart was pounding this morning because it's one thing to get together with y'all and have to come up with something interesting to say, but then to get the coffee together and to change to this room and go get the snack, all the logistics. I was like on fast. I was moving fast, right? And I know I have to also I need to slow down too. So where do you find that slowing down capacity? And for Karen, she says, for her, it's like moving inside the rhythms of the planet rather than your self-imposed rhythm, right? So some meditation practice I've been in, they're like, follow your heartbeat down to your rhythm, so you're dum-dum, dum-dum, just journey that way. Or you're slowing down of your breath. Whatever mechanism you use, or the way the wind is flowing. I don't know what it is for you, but you've got to practice this slowing down, and that there's some sort of inside of the rhythms of nature itself, of which we are, right? So your healing is in that rhythm. So it's not even as if you have to seek this healing like outside. It's inside of this rhythm of life that you're a part of. And for her, inside of that, I almost think it's her construction of soul from my perspective, but you rediscover this sense of balance, of deep connection, a little bit of freedom, of being more kind of awake and not overwhelmed and smothered. You feel more like a participant rather than someone who's controlling everything. All of those things start to onboard as you begin to slow down. And it turns out that I think we don't need to go to frog school, right? That's the thing. We keep putting ourselves in frog school so we can learn how to croak like a frog, but in reality, we do croak like frogs. So if you could slow down, you'd probably fall back into that experience again. And that in the end, I don't think soul is something, well, I think it is something that we construct in our heads because we all do it, but it also is something that is at a deeper level, and it embraces or is embraced by all that we're talking about today. Finally, one more practice that she uses, and then a little bit of where she's come to now, and then we'll wrap this up. She says, try to spend time with wild creatures a little bit every day. Maybe just pick one wild creature and be in relationship to that wild creature. I remember it was my mom, so I guess I can disclose that, but my mom and my dad lost their dog, which was, we love to domesticate the wild, so they had a domesticated animal, and they lost their dog, and maybe they were thinking about getting another one, But I said, Mom, why don't you kind of just go down and hang out with the geese that are down in your neck, and just at least think of them as your kind of wild partner for a while until you make your decision, right? And so she began to do that. She went to journey down to the local, what is that? It's like a, huh?
Pathway by the water.
Yeah, Pat by the, she's in San Luis Obispo area, so it's this, I don't know what you call it, but anyway, water comes in and water goes out, you know, that kind of space. So all these herons are out there, this beautiful wildlife, and she just hangs out with them for her 30 minutes, and how rejuvenating that's been for her. So it's that find something wild, whether it's the scrub jays or the squirrels in your yard or the birds, or John has a lizard that meets him outside of his sliding glass door whenever he goes outside, and be with the wild for a bit, and allow that same experience to inform your sense of soul. So where has this taken Karen on her path? And clearly, for many years, it took her to a place where she was a huge advocate in the environmental movement, right? So she was protesting, getting arrested, doing everything you do to fight the trajectory we're on. And over time, because of all her research and reading and activism, she and others arrived at this point where they realized that the climate is in collapse, and the inevitability of that is already baked into the system. And so while you might not find yourself there, for her and some of her circle, they've kind of said, we just have to come to the acceptance that this domestication has led us to this point where the climate itself is not going to sustain our species and many other species, and we got to come to grips with that, and that is a grief-soaked journey. And so she and others decided to take this kind of journey into grief to see where it would take them. And of course, the stages are very similar. First is denial. This can't be happening. There must be a way out of this. Then bargaining. Well, maybe we can figure out a way to solve this problem. And so all these techno solutions emerge on the scene. Maybe we should get behind all the techno solutions. They went down that pathway. And then just absolute anger, which then erupted in their protests, and this is wrong, and fighting. Then absolute depression, you know, where you're just like, it's not changing. And then finally to this idea of kind of acceptance that, well, this is inevitable. And what Karen discovered is going through that process is that by getting to a point of acceptance for her and those in her circle, she began to discover some of the beauty of landing there. And I'll share a link on wherever we're posting this today. She has a great interview with Michael Dowd and a few others that kind of goes through some of the things that she's learned along the way, like 15 things she's learned. But two of them I think are important for us. One is, once you get to that space, and it is not an easy journey, there is kind of a calm grounding where all of the frenetic energy around what's happening doesn't have as much effect on you anymore. You're like, I'm going to be present, almost like in a hospice situation, right? I'm going to be present for planet and myself and others in a deep and beautiful, loving way, because that's what I can do in this moment. And that has revitalized, almost reframed her experience of life, given this acceptance of kind of climate collapse. And the other one is the sort of capacity to let go of all the shame and disappointment and sadness, you know, just to let go of all that, because it's not going to do any good in some ways, and learn how to just embrace the moment in all of its fullness. Embrace the oak trees and the bird life and the, to see a butterfly and to think, I'm with you on this journey wherever it leads, right? To be fully present in that way has revitalized her life, moving through this grief. And you can't be a step skipper, right? You're probably going to go through some of that same stuff. I think I'm in depression, frankly. I don't know where you all at, but I'm like, oh, this is horrible. But to take that journey is what she would advise at this point. And you can kind of see that in her conversation she has with Michael Dowd. Let me close by saying what would she recommend as sort of a starting place. And she ended with this thought. Even though I was ready to get off the interview, she said, go and look at a wild creature in the eyes. Go out and see if you can look at a wild creature in the eyes. But start with the one that's in the mirror. And when she told me that, I thought, oh, if that's not a parable for our time. The wild creature that's in the mirror staring at you is inviting you into this sense of soul that's grounded in the very womb space, right, that's been holding us for billions and billions of years. See where that journey might lead you and me along the way.